The 1980s is an important era of history, with the crumbling Cold War metaphorically represented through the Berlin Wall, and like the Berlin Wall, gaming both crumbled as an industry to be saved by Nintendo and the NES, and laid down the foundations to become the growing media juggernaut of the 90s. Arcades were in their heyday, Nintendo was the top of the industry, and games followed a far different methodology from today, in that they weren't designed to be beaten, they were designed instead to be played, enjoyed over the course of multiple months rather than grinded through in a weekend. And yes, oh yes, they are so goddamn hard too. But there's something about games being hard that is a lost art form in the gaming zeitgeist of today, from software notwithstanding, of course. Over the last couple of years, I've been diving into the backlog of gaming history, and on this day, I've played 130 games from this decade. And in this video, I'll be sharing my top 10 games of the 1980s, the games that constructed the industry we all know and love today. You're watching Rail Deal Games, and let's dive right in. Number 10. One of the games I have the earliest memories of playing when I was extremely young is the original Ninja Gaiden. Just like the games from the 2000s that would take the franchise into the 3D era, Ninja Gaiden is not an easy game. There are loads of enemies coming from off-screen at all times, and because of the limited moveset of the player-controlled character, they are sometimes incredibly difficult to deal with. There's just something timeless in the 8-bit art style of Ninja Gaiden, with its restricted color palette and disappearing sprites during times of removing sprites from the screen. I played this on my Wii U for the first time in over 20 years back in June, and I was finally able to roll credits on it with the save state feature on the Wii U. Retrospectively, I wish I hadn't used this feature because it deconstructs the intention of how the developers wanted the game to be played. Ninja Gaiden was made with the intention for it to be played and mastered over the course of multiple months, and while I don't have the time to do such a thing, I would love to play a game in an attempt to replicate this gaming experience. I plan to mark Metal Gear off of my backlog this year, so maybe I'll give it a try this time around when I get around to that game. Number 9. Pac-Man changed a lot in terms of game design from the beginning of the 1980s, and a lot of studios started taking the Pac-Man formula, innovating on parts of it. Pirate Ship Higemaru is my favorite of these Pac-Man-like games. Pirate Ship doesn't play like Pac-Man, don't get me wrong, but the first time I played it, I instantly recognized the Pac-Man DNA baked into the game design, with the level design and the way the pirates chase the player character around. One touch is death. But where Pirate Ship innovates on the formula is the way the player is able to throw barrels at their pursuers. And to this end, you can actually create these situations where you're able to box yourself in with only one opening, and you can just knock them all down as they come. This is kind of a combat game too, because the only way to progress through the level is not to gather a certain number of pips. You've got to kill all of the small pirates on the map in order to go to the next stage. So that's a further development or innovation on Pac-Man itself. The innovations this game made edged it over Pac-Man for me, and comparing the two is something I plan to do more as I play more 80s games and gear up to release a top 50 list for the decade. Number 8. Herzog Zwei, or Herzog Zwei, is possibly the first pseudo-MOBA and is the only game on this list I've played exclusively in the PvP mode of. There was something so cool about the way the player is able to switch from jet to mech suit, and the game design is inspired in Herzog Zwei. Just like the MOBAs of today, like League of Legends and Dota, each player is simply trying to destroy the base of the opponent, while managing to stop the other player from destroying theirs. There's also a little bit of RTS DNA in Herzog Zwei as well, since each player is able to place out the mobs they want to either defend their base or to assault the other players. There's a franticness to playing this game that makes it one of the best games to play with your best friend. Herzog Zwei is also the most underrated hidden gem game on this list, and I could see this game going higher up on the list as time goes on. Number 7. Castlevania is a great 80s video game, but Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse does everything the original Castlevania does, but better. Even though there are definitely things I don't like about the classic Castlevania formula, such as the weighty jumping and knockback on damage, there's something mystifying about Castlevania as a franchise. As I played through the game, I kept thinking about the Netflix adaptations, and honestly, the Netflix adaptations provided me a more detailed canvas to unpack the abstractions of Dracula's cursed through. Something I love about retro video games is the reliance upon abstraction. My mind is more at work while playing 80s video games because my brain is filling in the gaps the 8-bit hardware limitations couldn't cover themselves. I didn't beat this game because by the time I got around to this one, I was no longer using the convenience features provided by modern ports of classic games. Clearly, I was correct in my earlier assumption of how this would impact my enjoyment of an 80s game, because this one does stand out more than Ninja Gaiden, partly because of how I took my time to enjoy the game rather than rushing through it just to roll credits. Beating games just doesn't matter if the playing of the game is enjoyable. Number 6. Minesweeper is the game Bill Gates became so addicted to he had to uninstall it from his computer, only to be discovered playing Minesweeper on his employees' computers. And I can't blame him. Minesweeper is a simple game, but it is the type of game that begs to be played again and again. That's really the main enduring quality of 80s games too. They are all so fun to play over and over again. Number 5. Contra is my favorite co-op game from the 80s. Contra is the hardest game on my list, and playing it with another person makes it only slightly easier. I really like the way this game promotes the same type of gameplay Ninja Gaiden does. The whole loop is about playing and replaying levels until the player has attained the truest form of mastery. It's a type of game design that doesn't exist anymore outside of From Software's works and their acolytes, and I wish more studios would revisit this type of game design again, adding punishment to other genres once more. Number 4. Previous to Super Mario Bros. Wonder, Super Mario Bros. 3 was my favorite 2D Mario game, and while it may now be number 2 on that list, it is undeniably the best platformer from the 80s. There's a nice amount of power-ups and level design in this game, leading to a combination of elements that create one of the best gameplay loops in all of gaming history. There's a timeless quality to the gameplay of Super Mario Bros. 3, and no top 10 of the 80s list would be complete without this title on it. Number 3. As the intro of this video suggested, the 1980s was characterized by the Cold War and political tensions between the United States and Russia. Before the crumbling of the Berlin Wall and the semi-canonical cooling of the Cold War, Tetris barely managed to escape from the Iron Curtain through a tricky bit of political and corporate maneuvering. The original line-clear game, Tetris was a gaming phenomenon in the 80s and 90s. While Tetris isn't the gaming mainstay it once was, I don't think Tetris will ever get old. It's the most timeless video game of all time, and no matter how far the gaming industry goes, there will always be a place for Tetris. Number 2. The first arcade game I ever played was Dig Dug, and ever since I first played it, I fell in love with its assortment of characters. The lizard sprite is one of my favorite sprites of all time, right up there with the Cacodemon sprite from Doom, and the digitized actors of the early Mortal Kombat games. A simple game, Dig Dug just hits in a way that the other arcade games of the 80s don't. Arcade games have to create the one more go feeling that roguelikes are so good at doing in today's gaming zeitgeist. Dig Dug is the best one at creating this sense, and it's one of those games I can play for several hours in a row because of its addicting gameplay loop. In fact, addicting gameplay loops is the main draw of playing retro games from the 80s. It's crazy that even given experiences like Elden Ring and Baldur's Gate 3, I can still find the want to play something as simple and endearing as Dig Dug. Number 1. An aspect of 80s game design I miss is obscurity and quest completion goals, and no game demonstrates the best utilization of this design philosophy than the original Final Fantasy. Inspired initially by Dungeons & Dragons, Final Fantasy creates a gaming experience that engenders a feeling of adventure and exploration in the player, which is crazy given the limited nature of the game's exploration systems and constant random encounters. With the Pixel remaster now on consoles, I plan to replay this game for the platinum, and honestly, I am hyped to do so. There's a coziness to these vintage JRPGs that more modern games, even the ones trying to pay homage to the classics, just don't have and can't replicate. Final Fantasy is epic, cozy, and the best gaming experience I've had from a 1980s game, and I think we'll be seeing more from this franchise as I go through the decades, ranking my top 10 games from each decade. And that's the video, guys. What's your favorite game from the 1980s? Do you have a top 10? Tell me all about them in the comments below, and while you're down there, smash that like button for me. And if you'd like more gaming content from me, including my top 10s of the 90s coming soon, make sure to subscribe to Real Deal Games. And if you have a moment right now, consider checking out some of my other videos on screen. Regardless of what you choose to do, have an awesome day, gamers.